Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for another food safety module. This is the 11th module of continuing education related to school HACCP and to school food safety. Today we'll be talking about managing vomiting and diarrheal events to limit the spread of norovirus. This module will provide 1 hour of continuing education for the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction in the School Nutrition Key Area of Operations Area of General Food Safety. Let's start off with a story. Once upon a time, there was a guy named Ben. He was traveling out of the country with his wife, and they were flying out of an airport. Ben went to get him and his wife something to eat from one of the airport restaurants, and as he was carrying a tray of sodas back, he slipped and fell. The sodas went all over the place and onto a table at the restaurant where some people were eating. Fortunately, they were more concerned about his safety than the fact that he spilled sodas on their table. Ben had slipped on a wet area on the floor that hadn't been marked with any sort of notification cone or sign, and he didn't see the wet spot when he was walking by. As Ben was getting up and cleaning himself off, embarrassed, one of the two people said to the other, "Should we tell him what happened?" The other said, "I guess we should." They proceeded to tell Ben that the reason the floor was wet was because someone else had vomited in the restaurant and it had been mopped up. As it turns out, Ben works in food safety, so it's pretty ironic that he slipped in some vomit at a restaurant. This story highlights some important points. We know that there are vomit events going on across the country every day in schools, cafeterias, restaurants, and grocery stores, all places where food is handled. Vomit events are most common in the winter months because winter is the height of norovirus season, and norovirus causes people to vomit. Cleaning up vomit is the front line of handling norovirus and one of the best ways to protect you and your facility from norovirus. Because we cannot control how often people vomit in schools, and because we often do not know why they vomit, it is important to have and carry out a plan for cleaning and sanitizing after every vomit event. We have to err on the side of caution and treat each vomit situation as if the person had norovirus. This picture very simply sums up the symptoms of norovirus: diarrhea and vomiting, which often includes projectile vomit. Norovirus is also extremely contagious and can spread through numerous routes, from person to person, in food, in water, on surfaces, and even through the air, which we call aerosolization. You have probably seen examples of just how quickly it spreads. A great example comes from an outbreak of norovirus in Person County, North Carolina, in September 2015. It only took a few days for nearly every student in the entire county to get norovirus. If you are familiar with the Charlotte-based restaurant Cowfish, you might remember hearing about an outbreak of norovirus at their Charlotte location during the summer of 2015. The outbreak made 50 people sick and led the restaurant to voluntarily close to deal with the situation. Their idea of dealing with the situation was to perform their normal cleaning and sanitizing procedures, which involved using quats, or quaternary ammonia compounds. Unfortunately, quats are not effective against norovirus, so more people got sick after they reopened. They were forced to close a second time and bring in professionals to clean and sanitize. This time, quats were not used and the outbreak ended. This outbreak highlights two things. First, effective cleaning and sanitizing is critical, especially for a vomit or diarrheal event. By using the wrong sanitizer, they might as well have not been cleaning at all, so people continued to get sick. Second, the sanitizer matters. You can clean all you want, but if you are using the wrong sanitizer, it won't get rid of norovirus. You may also have heard about the Chipotle outbreaks. Some of them have been linked to norovirus, including one outbreak in August 2015 that made 234 people in California sick, and another one a few months later in Boston that made 140 people sick. We are not sure how the people got sick. It may have been from an ill employee who transferred the virus to food they were handling, or from a customer who got sick in the restroom, after which their normal cleaning and sanitizing procedure dragged it through the restaurant. One of our colleagues told us her story of getting norovirus on a trip to New Orleans. For lunch, she enjoyed some Mexican food from her aunt's favorite restaurant. About 3 hours later, she started feeling queasy, but thought it was because she was hungry. After stopping at another restaurant for dinner, she knew she was going to be sick and rushed through the crowded restaurant to the bathroom. Unfortunately, all of the stalls in the bathroom were full, so she vomited in the sink. She tried to clean it up, but in reality, the entire bathroom had become contaminated because particles from her vomit had moved into the air and were now circulating throughout the bathroom. She knew it had to be the food when her aunt got sick after eating some of the leftovers from the Mexican restaurant. It was likely a food handler that contaminated the Mexican food. Proper cleaning could have helped prevent the spread of norovirus to food when it was prepared, and later to others after she got sick in the restaurant bathroom. So why does norovirus spread so quickly? First, it only takes a few virus particles to make you sick. Second, one vomit event can contain billions of these virus particles. We mentioned that they can aerosolize, which means they travel pretty far from where someone vomits, which we will talk in detail about later. Lastly, it can survive in the environment, on floors, toilet handles, doorknobs, lockers, chairs, and other surfaces, for weeks. One of the easiest and most effective ways to prevent norovirus is hand washing. A great example of why hand washing is important in preventing norovirus comes from a Japanese bread company named Hofuku, which was a major bread producer for Japanese schools. At least 1,000 children got sick after eating bread made by this company because one ill food handler came to work and did not wash their hands properly. Investigators isolated norovirus from an ill employee, a restaurant doorknob, and a toilet even after being cleaned and sanitized. We know that norovirus can live on surfaces for weeks, so hand washing is a critical checkpoint even if cleaning and sanitizing procedures fail. Hand washing prevents the spread of norovirus from surfaces to food. In the bakery outbreak, it was likely that the food handler was no longer showing symptoms but was still spreading norovirus. Norovirus is shed in feces in both symptomatic and asymptomatic individuals, which means that someone who is not showing symptoms can still spread the virus through their poop. The data from this graph comes from a challenge study where people were fed norovirus. This graph shows the number of virus particles being shed by people that were asymptomatic, meaning they were not showing symptoms, and people who were symptomatic, or showing symptoms. On average, people had symptoms up until day 4. On the vomiting and diarrhea graph on the left, each dot represents the beginning of a vomit or diarrhea event. The number of particles is measured on the y-axis using a log scale. The scale is based on log base 10 of 10, which equals 1 billion. So for every increase in 1 on the y-axis, the number goes up by 1 billion. The numbers of norovirus particles that people are shedding in their poop or vomit is well into the billions, between 7 and 12 billion. As you can see, everyone, regardless of whether or not they had symptoms, was shedding virus particles. They were still shedding even up to 2 weeks after getting the virus. Feeding studies have shown that hand washing is important even if you don't have symptoms because the virus is still being shed in feces after symptoms go away. However, hand washing is especially critical in the first day or two after someone gets the virus because they are shedding billions and billions of particles for every event. Billions of particles is a lot, and remember that it does not take many of them to make you sick. It only takes between 10 and 100 particles to cause illness. Add to this the fact that norovirus particles are also extremely small. The amount of virus particles that fit on the head of a pin would be enough to infect 1,000 people. With so many of them being shed and so few of them causing illness, it's no wonder norovirus is so contagious. We have said that vomit events happen daily, but what are the chances that a vomit event is actually due to norovirus? How common is norovirus? About 1 in 15 Americans will get norovirus each year. There are 5.5 million food-related cases each year in the U.S., and it is the second leading cause of food-related hospitalizations. Norovirus causes $3 billion in economic losses from people missing work and lost productivity. It is a problem in schools because of lost school and work time, and also because of the burden it places on parents who have to either miss work or find childcare. We have already mentioned that norovirus is transmitted person to person, in food, in water, on surfaces, and through the air. Part of what makes it spread quickly through these routes is that it can survive for up to 2 weeks on surfaces and up to 2 months in water. A lot of what we learned about how norovirus is transmitted through the air comes from research done here at NC State University. A graduate student in the food science department created a lifelike vomit machine to study the spread of norovirus particles through aerosolized vomit. To make the machine as lifelike as possible so that the researchers could get as close to a human model as possible, it had a tipping bucket to simulate the vomit splatter and was even given a human face. Their studies showed that vomit particles, which we know could contain norovirus, can spread up to a 25-foot radius outside of the visible vomit area. Other research has shown a 15-foot radius, but the NC State research gives a more conservative estimate. However, we can clearly see from the research that vomit and norovirus particles can get into the air and be carried quite far from where someone vomits. This becomes important for cleaning and sanitizing procedures. Because norovirus is extremely hardy and can survive on surfaces for weeks, surface disinfection is crucial. Rapid and effective cleaning of vomit is critical because one vomit event can spread lots of particles around that can then linger if they are not cleaned up and disinfected properly right away. Remember the bread company example? They did not clean properly, and the particles survived on the doorknob and toilet seat. Part of managing norovirus effectively is having a plan. Your school should have a written plan for how to handle a vomit or diarrhea event, and it should include where and how to clean as well as who is responsible for each part of the process. The plan needs to be specific to your school because there may be differences between schools that could affect how the situation needs to be handled. For example, in one school, there may be a restroom right near the cafeteria. This would be a higher risk area that needs to be cleaned first after a vomit or diarrhea event. The plan should also establish responsibility. It should have clearly defined roles of whose job it is to do each of the parts of the plan. At your school, it may be the custodian's role to clean up the vomit, but having these roles clearly outlined will make sure that no step falls through the cracks. For the plan to work, though, your school will need to have the necessary equipment on hand. This includes using chemicals and disinfectants that are effective against norovirus. Chlorine bleach is a great choice. Remember that quats are not effective against norovirus. Having personal protective equipment is also necessary for protecting those who are on the front lines cleaning up from becoming a vehicle for spreading norovirus, and from getting sick themselves. Employees also need to be properly trained before an incident happens. If this does not happen, trying to handle a vomit or diarrhea situation incorrectly could make things worse if it turns out that it was caused by norovirus. The plan should describe how information is shared. Everyone involved in handling a vomit or diarrhea event needs to communicate with each other to make sure every step in the process gets done correctly. To clarify this communication piece, the management plan should also include a written procedure for how school nutrition staff, teachers, volunteers, and custodial staff need to identify and report a vomiting and/or fecal contamination incident. You may be one of the first people on the scene for a vomit or fecal contamination situation, so it's important to know how to report what has happened and how to communicate it to others. Responsibilities will need to be established ahead of time. and this information shared with custodial staff and administration. The procedures should be communicated between staff members and administrators so that everyone knows their roles and responsibilities when a vomit or diarrhea event happens in your school. It is important to mention again that all vomit and fecal contamination should be treated as potential norovirus. This conservative recommendation adds an extra safety precaution and helps schools have more of an offensive, rather than a defensive, approach to preventing norovirus. Norovirus is more hardy than other pathogens, so treating the incident like norovirus will kill anything else that could be problematic. On the other hand, using control measures for other pathogens won't necessarily work on norovirus. Prompt attention to disinfection is needed to reduce the potential exposure to norovirus and resulting illness and outbreaks. Why the rush? Once a vomit or fecal event happens, aerosolization, foot traffic, air currents, and ventilation are all going to make the problem worse by spreading the virus far and wide. This next story is a good example. Susan and her daughter Jill were taking a cruise with their family. The family was just finishing dinner in the dining room. Jill, who is normally a light eater, was really hungry that evening, and the food was so good that she ate more than she could handle. Susan, who knew her daughter too well, knew Jill wasn't going to be able to hold down all that food. Susan tried to encourage her daughter to leave the table, but Jill didn't make it and vomited next to her chair. The ship staff saw the incident happen and responded immediately by coming over to Susan and Jill's table, armed with a vomit bag for Jill and some towels to help clean her up. However, they were so focused on Jill that they didn't have enough time to deal with the vomit puddle on the floor. Their table just so happened to be near the entrance and the exit to the dining room, and people were moving about all during this incident. As the staff and Susan were helping Jill, a man in a wheelchair passed by their table, rolling right through the vomit puddle and out of the dining room. This is why getting to the scene quickly and containing the area is crucial, because things like a guy in a wheelchair or even a person walking by can quickly transfer vomit and norovirus particles anywhere where they can survive for a long time and infect others. Getting there immediately means dealing with a messy, gross situation, but it's critical to prevent the spread as fast as possible. So who should be this lucky person? It is not the most glamorous job, but it is the most important. This person is the first line of defense. This first responder should be someone who is well trained and trusted. If vomit happens outside of your work area, such as in the hallway, it is not a bad idea to keep an eye on how it is cleaned up. If you are doing any cleaning, monitor your health just in case. Employees directly involved with cleanup activities should closely monitor their health for potential signs and symptoms of norovirus illness up to 72 hours after cleaning the affected areas. What should you do if you get norovirus? Unfortunately, no vaccine or drug for treatment is available at this time. Antibiotics do not cure norovirus. The best prescription is to stay nourished and hydrated, since you will be losing a lot of fluids through vomit and diarrhea. Dehydration is an issue because of the double threat of this fluid loss and the fact that it is really hard for people to keep any drinks or other fluids down. If you have ever been sick to your stomach, the last thing you want to do is eat or drink anything, especially if you know it will come right back up. If the case is severe and you just cannot take in any fluids to replace the ones you are losing, you may need IV treatment. As long as you are able to stay hydrated, symptoms usually go away on their own. Let's go back to this idea of a written management plan. It is important that it defines the area of contamination. The first step in a vomit or diarrheal event should be to clear everyone out of the immediate area as quickly as possible to prevent it from spreading further. Assess the overall area, air movement, and potential for foot traffic. Make sure the person who caused the event and anyone else who got vomit on them changes clothes because that can spread it around also. With the area cleared, you will want to identify and mark the vomit attack zone, as this picture so subtly describes it. We have already mentioned that norovirus can spread up to a 25-foot radius outside of the visible vomit area. Areas outside of the visible vomit area and within the 25-foot radius do still need to be cleaned and sanitized, but only things and surfaces that will touch hands or food. In other words, you do not have to scrub down the ceilings. The plan should describe how to clear the area and mark the area that needs to be cleaned and sanitized. After identifying and marking the area, the next step is to use some elbow grease to clean and sanitize it. Make sure to use personal protective equipment during cleaning and sanitizing. Vomit and/or fecal matter should be immediately covered with a disposable cloth, paper towels, or another absorbent material. Everything, especially food contact surfaces within the defined area, should be disinfected. Focus on areas that people will contact. It is also a good idea to close or block off the affected area or areas, or use caution, wet floor signs. As we just mentioned, use absorbent paper towels or other absorbent materials to soak up excessive soil caused by vomit and/or feces. Carefully transfer these and any solid matter into a plastic bag by folding it on itself and placing the waste materials into the plastic bag. Double bagging is recommended so that the bags do not leak or spill on the way to disposal or once in the trash. What you use to clean and sanitize, and how much, is just as important as when and where you clean and sanitize. Research tells us that chlorine is the only chemical that is effective against norovirus. It is impossible to effectively manage a vomit or diarrhea event in a cafeteria or kitchen without it. Although it does not have to be used for daily routine cleaning, it must at least be on hand in case of a potential norovirus situation. The CDC recommends a diluted chlorine bleach solution made from 5.25% sodium hypochlorite bleach for disinfecting. Use the highest concentration of 5,000 ppm of chlorine on the visibly soiled area of vomit or diarrhea. For other areas not visibly soiled that are still in the 25-foot radius, use a concentration of 1,000 ppm. It is important that this is measured correctly because bleach is less effective if you use too high of a concentration. We often instinctively want to put more in, but too much can inactivate the chlorine and keep it from working properly. If you use too low of a concentration, though, there won't be enough bleach to get rid of norovirus. When in doubt, read the label on the chemical bottle. Bleach that is old can also be ineffective. Use fresh bleach and bleach solutions. Test it with a test strip to determine if it is fresh. We strongly encourage the use of chlorine bleach to clean and sanitize after a vomit or diarrhea event, but understand that you may not have access to this chemical in your school. If you do not have bleach, focus on rapidly clearing the room and cleaning up vomit, and still apply a sanitizer. Understand, however, that it will not be nearly as effective as bleach. For floor surfaces, generally apply the disinfectant bleach solution with a disposable towel or mop head, keeping surfaces wet per the manufacturer's label, and then allowing the surfaces to air dry. Disassemble, clean, and sanitize all exposed food preparation equipment within the potential contamination area. We recommend that you throw away open and exposed food items and single-service items in the potential contamination area. Get rid of the mop head, too. Bag and seal and discard all disposable cleaning equipment, including mop heads, gloves, and aprons, exposed to the initial contamination or used during cleanup. This concludes the module on norovirus, effective cleaning and sanitation. We've gone over a lot today, but remember these key points. It only takes 1 to 10 virus particles to cause illness. There are billions of virus particles in each poop or vomit event. It is critical to have a plan for these events. Have the proper equipment and training, and establish responsibilities for handling these events. Feel free to contact Dr. Ben Chapman by email or phone if you have any questions. Thank you for viewing the module Norovirus, Effective Cleaning and Sanitation. We hope you will join us again for another module on school food safety.